Welcome back. Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez was laid to rest last Friday in Caracas. Several days earlier, he lost his 2-year battle with cancer. His closest advisors reported that his last words were, "I don't want to die. Don't let me die." A very human moment for a man who has held an almost godlike status to his supporters, who often referred to him as the Christ of the poor. Correspondent Stephen Gibbs has been following this story for America's Now. His report breaks down the man from the myth.
Love him or hate him, Hugo Chavez stamped his mark on this oil-rich country for much of the last 2 decades. Outspoken critic of the United States, self-proclaimed savior of the poor. His rule drew adoration from his supporters and passionate opposition from his detractors. It was in the 1990s that the former paratrooper first came to the attention of Venezuelans. Leader of an unsuccessful coup in 1992, he transformed himself into a formidable politician. His revolutionary rhetoric and promises of profound economic and social reforms united the left behind him and gave him a power base from Venezuela's poor. He was inaugurated president in 1999 with a substantial majority. Soon he set about constitutional reform, extending presidential terms and guaranteeing representative power to Venezuela's indigenous people. He even renamed the country the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela after his hero, 19th century independence leader Simón Bolívar. Abroad, Chavez saw himself as a leader of a new Latin America, united in common purpose and in various degrees of opposition to the US. His closest alliance was with Cuba's Fidel Castro, whom he often described as a father figure. In a deal organized by the two men, Venezuela sent Cuba almost all the oil the country required. In return, Cuba sent Venezuela much-needed doctors. The arrangement helped secure Hugo Chavez's popularity amongst his country's poorest people and a second term of office. But not everyone has been happy under the president's rule. Venezuela's opposition saw President Chavez's constitutional reforms as increasingly autocratic. In 2002, violent clashes broke out in Caracas. During this turbulent period, a brief, unsuccessful coup was attempted against the president. He emerged only more determined and more radical. As his rule approached its 3rd term in office, his criticism of the US administration became his trademark.
Ayer estuvo el diablo aquí. En este mismo lugar huele a azufre todavía.
Here at the United Nations, he famously claimed he could smell sulfur. The devil, he said, in the form of President George W. Bush, had been at the podium before him. Relations with the Obama administration were only slightly more cordial. The two presidents met just once, here at an America's summit. The US continued to view the leader of oil-rich Venezuela as a threat to the stability of the region. Hugo Chavez hoped to rule for at least another decade. In October 2012, he was re-elected for a 4th term with a reduced but still substantial majority, defeating Enrique Capriles, a young candidate who'd united the long-divided Venezuelan opposition. Ultimately, it was cancer, not his political enemies, which defeated him.
En la misma área afectada de algunas células malignas.
In December, he announced that the illness had returned and that he would require further surgery. Leaving for Cuba that last time, he seemed almost as confident as ever. "I'll be back," he said. As it turned out, President Chavez did eventually return home here to Venezuela, but he was never able to fully resume all his presidential duties. So how will he be judged? This firebrand leader made a substantial difference to the lives of millions of Venezuelans through his social projects in the country's poorest areas. But he leaves the country with plenty of enduring problems. A high murder rate, soaring inflation, and in what may yet prove the greatest challenge to his successor, a deeply divided population.
Stephen Gibbs joins us now from Caracas. Welcome, Stephen. You had an opportunity some years ago to meet and interview Hugo Chavez. What were your first impressions of him and what stood out to you?
A man that's just completely brilliant with people. He's the sort of person who can walk into a room and within seconds everyone there thinks they've got a new best friend who just happens to be a serving president. Very physical. He'd be hugging all the men, kissing all the women, cracking jokes the whole time. He talked to everyone at the same level. When I met him, there happened to be a Mexican general in the same room. He'd be talking to him in the same way as the woman who brought the coffee. But that meeting also reminded me of one flaw, perhaps, in Hugo Chavez's character, and that is very, very disorganized. We waited at least 8 hours for him to arrive. Then the meeting went on late into the night.
Do you think Chavez changed Venezuela forever?
I think politically he did. What he did is he's really turned the poorest people in this nation into a political force. If you talk to the poorer people in Venezuela, they say that Chavez opened their eyes. And these are people who are now voting. There was a huge change during his rule in the number of people voting. It went from 11 million to 19 million, and a lot of them are now Chavistas. So any future government has to deal with that big political shift. But in other ways, you could argue he didn't change the country so much. Bear in mind, he ruled during an extraordinary consumer boom. The price of oil went from $19 a barrel to over 100. This is a country that gets 95% of its foreign income from oil. And yet go around the country, and where's it all been spent? Look at the infrastructure. The roads are still falling to bits. And the social programs that he did spend a lot of this money on, of course they have made a big change, but are they going to make a permanent change to the economic and the social life of this country?
Stephen, many have compared Hugo Chavez to the Cuban revolutionary Che Guevara. Is he the new Che?
Well, I think every revolution needs its hero, and without doubt, Che Guevara became this sort of iconic figure of the Cuban Revolution. And possibly one thing we've noticed here over the 2 years since Hugo Chavez knew he had cancer and arguably knew that there wasn't much hope, we've seen a sort of slow conversion of him from a man and a president into something closer to the sort of spiritual leader of the nation. And that was particularly evident, I think, in his funeral, where the sword of Simón Bolívar was placed on his coffin, turning really Hugo Chavez into this national hero.
Nicolas Maduro is now acting president as they wait for the elections in Venezuela. And he seems to have taken on a lot of Hugo Chavez's mannerisms. He has even appointed Chavez's son-in-law as his vice president. What do you make of all that?
Oh, I think it's a completely deliberate strategy. The whole point of what the government's doing now is really saying that Hugo Chavez lives on, and he lives on in Nicolas Maduro, and it's in Nicolas Maduro's interest to appear as similar as possible to Hugo Chavez. Obviously, he can't completely imitate him, but he certainly is using his form of language. He's attacking the United States right in exactly the same way that Hugo Chavez did. And you're right, now the Venezuelan government temporarily, while it's an interim government, has a vice president who is related through marriage to Hugo Chavez. So no, it's all part of this continuing the Hugo Chavez legacy.
Stephen Gibbs in Caracas, thank you for your insight.